The heat shimmered over the asphalt, a suffocating blanket draped across the manicured lawns of the gated community. It was the kind of heat that made you feel like someone had left the world's largest oven door open. A faint breeze did little more than stir the hot dust around. Here, in this enclave of new money mansions, every house was a statement of success. Gleaming black iron gates, imported slate walkways, and a sense of polished, sterile perfection. From the outside, it was the American dream. But step inside, and you'd find a different kind of cold, the chilling way people can treat one another. My name is Amelia Harris. To anyone looking in, I was the lucky one, the daughter-in-law who'd married a rising star executive, living in a sprawling mansion with a luxury sedan in the 3-car garage. But a big house doesn't guarantee a warm home. Sometimes, a house of 10,000 square feet only has enough room for someone else's ego. That morning, I was in the kitchen of that mansion. And to be honest, it wasn't so different from any other kitchen. The same scent of sautéing garlic and onions, the same rhythmic chop of a knife against a cutting board, the same quiet solitude of a woman preparing a meal. The only difference was the stage dressing. Black marble countertops polished to a mirror shine, a 6-burner Viking range, and a set of all-clad pots and pans arranged with showroom precision. I was wearing a simple beige apron, just finishing a pan of haricots verts for lunch, when I heard the soft, shuffling slap of my mother-in-law's Gucci slippers on the Italian tile of the living room. Eleanor Carter, my mother-in-law, sat enthroned on the custom-made sofa, her posture ramrod straight as if a steel rod had been fused to her spine. A Cartier love bracelet gleamed on her wrist, and she held the television remote like it was a scepter, granting life or death to the talking heads on the financial news network. As I stepped to the edge of the kitchen, her eyes swept over me, a silent, top-to-bottom appraisal. It was a look that needed no words to make you feel out of place. She jutted her chin forward, her voice crisp and laced with vinegar. "Amelia, Ethan's important client will be here shortly. You, standing there in that apron, smelling of garlic. It's an eyesore. Get back in the kitchen." I froze for a beat before dipping my head. Yes, Eleanor. My yes was a small, swallowed thing designed for peace. They say to pick your battles, that turning the other cheek is a virtue. But when you turn it too often, people forget you have another side to your face. They just see a target. At precisely 10:30 a.m., my husband, Ethan, descended from the second floor. He was a picture of corporate success. Crisp white shirt, tailored gray trousers, hair styled with expensive pomade, and a Rolex sparkling on his wrist. He looked every bit the high-powered executive you see in magazines, lacking only a genuine smile for his wife. Ethan glanced at me, his lip twitching as if he'd just tasted something unpleasant. "Get some fruit ready, and make coffee. Once you've served it, make yourself scarce. I'm closing a multi-million-dollar deal today. The last thing I need is a woman in the living room, messing things up." The word woman, delivered that way, stung like a flick to a raw nerve. It was a sharp, metallic pang. So that's what I was in this house. The woman, a person permitted to exist only for service, who had to vanish when appearances mattered. Seated beside him, Eleanor nodded in sage agreement, like a professor approving a student's thesis. "Listen to your husband. A woman's place is in the kitchen. Stay out of the way, and don't cause trouble." I turned back to the kitchen. It had a large picture window overlooking the backyard, where the sun beat down, the heat a physical weight on my shoulders. I opened the Sub-Zero refrigerator and took out the Fruit Honeycrisp apples, organic grapes, a dragon fruit all bought for their visual appeal, because in this house, appearances were everything. I sliced the apple into paper-thin rounds, arranging them in a perfect, overlapping circle. My hands were busy, but my mind was a knot of taut threads. Important client was just a fancy term. The truth was, this meeting was for Ethan to show off to his mother, to prove the deal was in the bag so Eleanor could boast to the neighbors. The official signing would happen downtown, at the corporate headquarters, in a proper boardroom with lawyers, paralegals, and documented minutes. But for Eleanor and Ethan Carter, the true victory wasn't the signature on the paper. It was the envy in the eyes of the world. I ground the premium coffee beans. Ethan always bragged about a special blend gifted by a partner, which he'd warned me never to touch, as if it were a sacred artifact. I remained silent. Sometimes, explaining yourself is like singing opera to a dog. People believe what they want to believe. I set the tray on the counter, filled the coffee maker, and monitored the temperature. Good coffee, like a good life, requires precision. Too hot, and it turns bitter. Too cool, and it's weak. I smirked to myself. My life was like that coffee pot. People kept pouring boiling water in, and then complained about the taste. From the living room, Eleanor's voice carried, deliberately loud enough for me to hear. Making a simple pot of coffee is taking her forever. Other men have wives who know how to converse, how to entertain guests. We're just lucky ours is competent in the kitchen, I suppose. I tightened my grip on the handle of a knife, then released it. I would not allow myself to get angry. Anger was a loss. I took a deep breath, reminding myself of an old saying. A wise person knows when to speak and when to hold their tongue. Sometimes, silence isn't submission, it's strategy. Just then, the doorbell chimed a clear, musical tone that shifted the entire house into a new gear. Eleanor shot up as if spring-loaded, her face transforming into a mask of beaming hospitality. "Oh, that must be Mr. Thompson." Ethan straightened his tie, smoothed his lapels, and strode to the door as if welcoming his own good fortune. I stood in the kitchen, listening to the sharp, confident clicks of his Italian leather shoes on the marble floor, a sound that sent a chill down my spine. I carried the fruit platter to the kitchen doorway and witnessed a scene that was equal parts comical and painful. Eleanor was smiling so broadly, her eyes crinkled into webs. Her voice was pure saccharine. "Mr. Thompson, what a pleasure. Please, come in, come in." Then, she caught sight of me. Her expression instantly frosted over. Right in front of her guest, she said, with a dismissive wave of her hand, "Oh, please excuse the mess. The help is just tidying up." I stood frozen, a wave of ice water crashing over my chest. The help. In my own home, I had become the help, all because I was wearing an apron. Ethan chuckled, joining in the charade with a tone that was meant to be a joke but wasn't. "That's my wife, Thompson. A bit provincial, you know? She's most comfortable in the kitchen. Anyway, let's talk business. We can finalize things here and head to the office at 11:30 for the official signing." Mr. Thompson, a man in his mid-50s with a distinguished, composed demeanor, offered a polite, non-committal smile. But I saw something flicker in his eyes, a brief pause, the way you notice a hairline crack in a freshly painted wall. I said nothing. I turned back into the kitchen, set the tray down, and untied my apron. I didn't rush. I didn't yank it off. I folded it neatly and draped it over the back of a chair, as if hanging up the roll they had just forced upon me. I washed my hands slowly, the cool water running over my fingers, but a fire was building inside me. I wasn't washing away dirt. I was washing away the feeling of being mislabeled, washing away the humiliation they had so casually pasted on my forehead. Finished, I turned back to the coffee. I poured a small amount into a cup and inhaled the aroma. It was rich, deep, and complex. I told myself that a woman's life is sometimes like this. You have to wait for the water to boil, not to serve others, but so when you finally pour, everyone tastes the truth. I placed the coffee service on a tray and walked out into the hallway. My steps were light, my back straight. Ahead, the living room was abuzz with their performance. Eleanor's laugh, Ethan's booming monologue. And there I was, walking through this bright, sunlit house as if I were walking onto a stage. I knew that the more passionately a play is acted, the more painful the curtain fall will be. I set the tray on the glass coffee table, my movements so gentle they made no sound. The room smelled of air conditioning and expensive floor polish, the clean, impersonal scent of a new house that couldn't quite mask the unpleasant odor of pretense. Ethan was seated opposite Mr. Thompson, leaning back slightly with his hands spread wide, as if delivering a sermon. Eleanor perched to the side, the perfect CEO's mother, her eyes darting around to see if their guest was admiring the crystal chandelier or the Ming Dynasty replica vase she'd recently acquired. I bowed my head respectfully. "Mr. Thompson, your coffee." Ethan didn't look at me, merely giving a slight nod that meant, "You're dismissed." Eleanor offered a thin, brittle smile. "The girl is a bit clumsy," I'm afraid, she inserted, as if speaking of a stranger. She's only good for these simple tasks. I didn't reply. In this house, a single word of rebuttal would brand me as disrespectful and ill-bred. So I retreated to the doorway of the kitchen, standing just behind the decorative wooden screen, close enough to see and hear, and just far enough for them to pretend I wasn't there. Ethan began to pour out words like water. My team has optimized the entire shipping route with a new AI system. It reroutes our fleet in real time, cutting down on warehouse wait times. We're projecting a 15% increase in our profit margin this quarter alone. Mr. Thompson took a sip of his coffee. He didn't praise it, nor did he criticize it. He just gave a slight nod, his expression unreadable. But I could read that placid look. It wasn't one of trust, but of verification. He was listening to check the facts, not to be impressed. Eleanor, however, was beaming. You see, Mr. Thompson? My Ethan is brilliant. Once he climbs even higher in the company, our family will be set. A woman like her, she gestured vaguely in my direction, is only good for having babies and cooking meals. Ethan smirked, fueled by his mother's praise. Business is about vision. What would someone who spends all day in a kitchen know about that? I heard his words, and a quote echoed in my mind. Be wise in your dealings with outsiders. But with family, why did they insist on using words like knives? Still, I remained still. I reminded myself that words are free, but some people use them to buy the feeling of superiority. Mr. Thompson placed his coffee cup back on its saucer. The quiet times clink times was just loud enough to make Ethan pause. Mr. Thompson's voice was calm, yet sharp. This 15% profit margin you've projected, is that based on reducing spoilage or increasing your service fees? Ethan, quick on his feet, answered as if reciting a script. A combination of both, of course. We've enhanced our cold chain logistics to minimize loss, and we're offering a new premium tier for our strategic partners. Mr. Thompson looked him straight in the eye. And what standard are you using for your cold chain? HACP, ISO 22000, or are you just using internal KPIs? Ethan faltered. I saw it clearly, the slight tightening of his fingers around his cup. He quickly recovered with a dismissive laugh. Oh, we're flexible on that. The operations team handles the specifics. I'm in sales. I close the deals. Mr. Thompson said nothing more than a quiet, I see. But that I see was like a light tap on a wall to see if it was solid or hollow. Eleanor, oblivious, continued her performance, refilling his cup. You can rest assured, Mr. Thompson. Our family does everything by the book. My Ethan is meticulous. Then, she turned her head toward the kitchen, raising her voice. Amelia, prepare another pot. Honestly, a woman so slow is useless. We're doing big business out here. We can't be kept waiting. I didn't move immediately. I refused to be conditioned to jump at her command. I rinsed the pot, measured the beans, and followed the process slowly, deliberately. I understood that a true connoisseur doesn't need to shout, only a person who wants to give orders. When I brought the fresh pot of coffee out, Ethan was deep into a monologue about ERP systems, project cash flows, and disbursement funds, all very impressive-sounding terms. But Mr. Thompson still looked unconvinced. He would occasionally raise an eyebrow, his gaze that of a man who had seen too many talkers in his time. I set down the coffee and poured a cup for Mr. Thompson first, as etiquette dictated. He gave a slight nod of thanks. Just a nod, but it was worlds away from the way Ethan and Eleanor looked at me. In that brief moment, I realized that some people will treat you with basic decency regardless of who you are, while others, who live with you every day, will only be happy if they can look down on you. Eleanor saw his nod, and it was as if her ego had been pricked. She forced a laugh. Oh, please don't mind her, Mr. Thompson. She has no manners to speak of, being cooped up in here all the time. Mr. Thompson placed his hand on the cup. His voice was still mild. On the contrary, I find she pours coffee with great precision. She doesn't rush. The comment was a simple observation, not a defense, but to Eleanor, it was a thorn. She gave a strained smile and quickly changed the subject, asking Ethan about his projected annual bonus. Ethan, seizing the opportunity, began to boast again. Once this contract is signed, the whole sales team gets a massive bonus. Mom, get ready. I'm upgrading to the new Mercedes S-Class by the end of the year. I stood in the kitchen doorway, a sad smile on my face. A new car, and the contract wasn't even signed. But Ethan spoke as if the signed papers were already in his breast pocket. Mr. Thompson was silent for a moment, then stood. If you'll excuse me, I need to use the restroom. Eleanor jumped up, pointing the way as if he might get lost in the sprawling house. Of course. It's down the hall to your right. Mr. Thompson walked down the rear hallway, the one that passed by the kitchen. Ethan slumped back into the sofa, letting out a satisfied breath, as if he'd just verbally conquered his opponent. Eleanor turned to me, her voice low but sharp. Stay in the kitchen. Don't you dare show your face again. We can't have people thinking this family doesn't know how to train a wife. I nodded. But this time, my nod wasn't one of submission. It was the nod of someone who had just decided that some of the rules in this house were about to be rewritten. I turned back to the kitchen, hearing the sound of Mr. Thompson's footsteps on the cold marble floor, each step a steady, deliberate tick of a clock. And I knew that sometimes, a single moment is all a discerning person needs to see the truth an entire household is trying to hide. I had just turned to place the coffee pot back on its warmer, when I heard the footsteps pause at the entrance to the hall. It wasn't an abrupt stop, but a hesitation, the kind a person makes when they are considering their next move. This house was large, but that morning, the silence was so compressed, I felt I could hear the breathing of the man in the hallway. I didn't look up immediately. I pretended to be busy, drying my hands, adjusting the coffee tray, closing the lid on the sugar bowl. It was a habit of mine. The more stressed I became, the more meticulously I organized my surroundings. People say a clean house is a happy house. I believe a clear mind is what allows you to stand firm. The footsteps started again, one step, then another. I saw his reflection in the glass of the kitchen cabinets. It was Mr. Thompson. He was passing the open kitchen door, and in that exact moment, I leaned over to pick up the black leather-bound journal I always kept on the counter. It was a habit of mine, keeping it within arm's reach, not for recipes, but for key details. Facts that could not be forgotten. I opened the journal and jotted down a few short lines, my handwriting neat and concise. A timestamp, a name, a task to be completed. The pen scratched softly against the paper. I felt Mr. Thompson's gaze on me, not a prying look, but the look of someone who has just noticed something that doesn't fit. His gaze lingered for a second, no more, before he continued on his way, maintaining his politeness. But I knew that 1 second was all it took for a man seasoned in the world of business to plant a flag in his mind. Asterisk, something isn't right here. Asterisk, I didn't follow his gaze. I closed the journal and set it down next to my phone, which was lying face down. The screen was dark, but I knew that with a single touch, everything hidden beneath the submissive wife facade would spring into motion. I heard the restroom door close at the end of the hall, followed by the sound of running water. While I waited for Mr. Thompson to return, I took a moment to do one small thing. I adjusted the vase of white gladiolas on the kitchen island. Eleanor liked them because they looked elegant. I wasn't fond of them, but in a house where people only believed what they could see. Sometimes, you had to let them get lost in the fragrance of their own illusions. Mr. Thompson returned, his footsteps once again steady on the marble floor. But this time, the rhythm seemed slower. As he passed the kitchen again, he didn't stop, but he gave a quick, sharp glance inside. And I stood straight, not hunched over, not timid. I had nothing to prove. I just needed to not diminish myself. He re-entered the living room. I heard Ethan's slightly too loud laugh, the laugh of a man overcompensating. Eleanor was back to pouring coffee and pouring praise on her son. But after his trip to the restroom, Mr. Thompson wasn't smiling politely anymore. He sat down, looked at the cup in front of him without picking it up, and asked a question that was like plunging a needle into a balloon. Ethan, this contract pertains to cold chain storage and transportation on the Newark to Philadelphia corridor, correct? I'd like to see your mitigation plan for spoilage at each transfer point. Ethan's smile was quick and brittle. Of course, we have a system for that. Our spoilage rates are the lowest in the industry. Mr. Thompson nodded, his voice even. What system is that? Who is responsible for signing off on the logs? And the data you're citing, which Nexus Logistics report did you pull that from? Ethan was flustered for a moment. I could hear it in the way he cleared his throat before answering. Ah, that's from an internal report. I'll have the operations department send it over. Mr. Thompson made a soft sound and then continued, his timing perfect. An internal report is fine, but we are scheduled to sign the final contract at 11:30. I will need a summary memo, verified by your internal audit or legal department, for my own peace of mind. The atmosphere in the living room grew heavy. Eleanor probably didn't know what internal audit meant, but she heard legal department and her brow furrowed, as if she sensed this was no longer about simple bragging rights. Ethan tried to laugh it off. You're very thorough, Mr. Thompson. In business, trust is the most important thing. Mr. Thompson looked him in the eye. Trust is excellent, but I've been in this business a long time, and I trust process more. As they say, better to be safe than sorry. That line cornered Ethan. Eleanor quickly jumped in, her voice sweet, trying to salvage the mood. Oh, Mr. Thompson, don't you worry. Our family does everything by the book. Ethan is the pillar of this family. He handles everything. Mr. Thompson smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. He looked down at his coffee and said something so quietly that I knew it was meant to carry weight. A pillar is a fine thing, but a pillar with a rotten core can collapse in the first storm. Eleanor was stunned, unsure how to interpret that. Ethan tried to laugh as if it were a joke. In the kitchen, I washed a few cups, but my ears were tuned to the living room. I didn't want Ethan to be exposed right there, in his own home. Not out of compassion, but because I wanted things to unfold at the right pace. I understood that a man like Ethan feared losing face above all else. If he lost it too soon, he would lash out, thrash around, and find someone else to blame. But if you let him slide, at the right time and in the right place, the fall would be one from which there was no recovery. Eleanor called out again, as if to reassert her control. Amelia, come pour more coffee for our guest. This time, I didn't answer yes. I simply walked out, poured the coffee, set the cup down before Mr. Thompson, and stepped back. As my hand left the cup, he glanced up. His eyes met mine, not for long, but long enough. I saw the clarity in them, not the curiosity of a man looking at a woman, but the look of a businessman sizing up an unknown variable. He spoke softly, politely. Excellent coffee. Thank you, miss. I just nodded. You're welcome. Eleanor, hearing him call me miss, felt the need to correct the script. She gave a strained laugh. Don't praise her, Mr. Thompson. She's got nimble fingers, that's all. As for her mind, well, she's just a woman. Mr. Thompson didn't argue. He just set his cup down and asked Ethan one final question, a question that was like a seal on his suspicion. Ethan, I'd like to ask you directly. Who is the final signatory for Nexus Logistics on this deal? I need to know I'm dealing with the person who has the ultimate authority. Ethan laughed loudly, as if to drown out any doubt. Well, me, of course. I'm the VP of sales. I close all the major deals. Mr. Thompson nodded, his expression placid. Then please show me the email from the board or a signed authorization granting you final signatory power. I'd rather not get to the signing table only to be told we have to wait for the CEO. In the kitchen, I turned the faucet down until the water dripped, one drop at a time, each one audible. I didn't need to see Ethan's face to know if it was red or pale. A person accustomed to lying fears nothing more than a simple, direct question. There's an old saying, you can't wrap fire in paper. The fire was already lit. It just hadn't burst into flames yet. I stood there, my hands dry, my apron off, my heart strangely calm. It wasn't apathy. I had learned to not let my emotions pull me off course. Out there, Ethan was trying to laugh it off, and Eleanor was trying to fill the silence, and Mr. Thompson, he was waiting and watching. In that silence, I knew the play being performed in this house was starting to show cracks, like thin ice under the late summer sun. It wouldn't be loud, but it would surely break. I'm not one for melodrama, but some things need to be said, or people will mistake silence for weakness. The truth is, I had been preparing for this for months. 6 months ago, Nexus Logistics had entered a precarious phase, what people in business call a tipping point, where a single crack could bring down a wall. We were in the middle of our semi-annual audit, renegotiating our credit line with the bank, and had a major bid for a new cold storage facility pending approval. These things sound dry, but they are matters of corporate life and death. If an internal scandal erupted at that exact moment, shareholders would panic, partners would withdraw, the bank would tighten credit, and whoever was responsible could erase their tracks overnight. I had smelled something wrong long before, not through a wife's intuition, but through the data. Some numbers look good on the surface, but when you touch them, they feel fake. Inventory levels were unnaturally smooth, operating costs were suspiciously low, and profit reports were suddenly as perfect as a painting. I looked at those reports and saw a cheap suit. The seams were straight, but the fabric was so flimsy it would disintegrate at the first drop of rain. I called Michael, the head of internal audit, and David, our chief legal counsel. I didn't make a scene. I didn't pound my fist on the table in the boardroom. I just said one thing. I want a special, discreet review, by the book. Every piece of evidence must be legally sound. Michael understood immediately. David looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. If you've made the decision, ma'am, my team will prepare a contingency plan to protect our partners as well. From that day on, I began to disappear in the way a person in power does. I didn't post about my busy schedule on LinkedIn. I didn't attend industry galas where people take photos for press releases. I locked down internal communications, delegated day-to-day approvals to my subordinates according to company policy, and let Ethan take the lead on the external-facing business development he so desperately craved. Don't misunderstand me. This wasn't an emotional concession. I was placing Ethan in the perfect position to be a trap. A person hungry for power will walk right into it, believing their time has come. Ethan had a gift for gab and a talent for looking the part. He stepped into the spotlight and began to believe in his own performance. Meanwhile, I would come home to this house every day, listen to Eleanor's complaints about the dinner menu, and watch Ethan leave early and come home late, smelling of expensive cologne. But at night, when the house was asleep, my real work began. I didn't need to play detective. I was part of the special review team, under the guise of an external risk assessment consultant, with full data access authorized by the CEO. I spent my nights in the server room, cross-referencing system logs, tracking revision histories on financial reports, and tracing the flow of funds. Everything leaves a digital footprint. You just have to be patient enough to piece it all together. Someone might ask, why didn't you confront Ethan as soon as you found something? It's easy to catch someone early, but it's hard to do it right. If I had accused him without ironclad proof, he would have claimed I was paranoid, rallied his allies, and blamed it all on a subordinate. Worse, the real rot in the system would have had time to cover its tracks. I couldn't let Nexus Logistics collapse because of my impatience. I needed one clean cut, but it had to be a legal one, backed by logs, bank statements, and the full weight of our legal department. But there was another, more painful dimension: my family. I once thought that even if my in-laws didn't love me, they would at least maintain a level of respect. But when they became convinced I was just a freeloader, their true colors showed. Eleanor started lecturing me with tired old phrases about how a daughter-in-law must be subservient to keep the peace. Ethan would say things that chilled me to the bone. Just stay home and look pretty. Let me handle the important things. But when it came to household expenses, the money he gave me felt like charity. If I said it wasn't enough, he would sneer. What are you spending so much on? I'm not saying this for pity. I'm saying it because when people see you as beneath them, they will treat you exactly as they imagine you to be. At that point, you have two choices. You can scream and fight and be labeled a shrew, or you can quietly build your case and wait for the right moment to let them choke on their own words. I chose the latter. There's a line from a poem I read in college. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. I was no longer a piece of silk to be picked up and put down at someone's whim. I was weaving my own tapestry, and anyone who tried to tear it would pay the price. On that Tuesday morning, as I stood in the kitchen listening to Ethan's boasting and Eleanor calling me the help, I wasn't surprised. I had seen their true nature long ago. The only thing I was waiting for was for them to say a little more, do a little more, and seal their own fate. I poured the coffee, set it down, and retreated. Not out of fear, but because when a man is standing on a rickety stage of his own making, you don't need to pull him down. You just need to remove the right pin. The stage will collapse on its own. My suspicions about Ethan didn't start on that Tuesday, but several weeks earlier, I was folding laundry for our son when I heard the click of his office door. He stepped inside, phone to his ear, his voice low but sharp. I already told you, just bill those expenses under operational maintenance. The profit margin needs to look good. If it looks good, we get the deal. And if we get the deal, everyone gets a piece. I froze. Asterisk. Everyone gets a piece. Asterisk. It sounded like a celebration, but in business, that phrase often comes with a dirty secret, a kickback. I didn't storm in and demand an explanation. I didn't plant a listening device like in the movies. This house had too many eyes and ears. Any unusual behavior and Eleanor would invent a story about a snooping wife. I did something simpler. I noted the time and the name of the company Ethan mentioned later in the call. It was an unfamiliar name, not on our list of approved vendors for Nexus Logistics. Ethan spoke the name Apex Solutions with a familiarity reserved for close friends. A few days later, he said it again, this time more clearly. Don't worry about Apex. I've got it handled. Apex Solutions. The name sent a chill through me. I started a quiet, official inquiry, using my own access credentials. No one needed to know. I just needed to cross-reference. Apex appeared on our books, looking picture perfect. A recently formed LLC, clean paperwork, steady contracts, and regular payments. It was all too regular. Almost unnaturally so. As they say, if it looks too good to be true, it probably is. I looked at the payment chain and wanted to laugh. It was structured like a textbook example for an accounting student, but the real world isn't a textbook. That night, Ethan came home late, smelling faintly of bourbon. He tossed his keys on the counter, draped his jacket over a chair, and pulled a thick wad of cash from his wallet. He peeled off a few bills and slapped them on the table in front of me. Here. This month's household money. Don't ask questions. His tone wasn't one of providing, it was one of tossing a bone. I looked at the cash without counting it. I just looked up. Ethan, our son's tuition is due next month, and my mother has her regular checkup. He waved his hand dismissively. Stop worrying about the big picture. You're at home. Do your job. If you're short, I'll handle it. Eleanor, sitting nearby, overheard the word short and immediately chimed in, her tone as casual as if discussing the weather. Women. They see money, and they start to worry. This house has Ethan to support it. All she needs to worry about is putting a decent meal on the table. I didn't argue. I went to the kitchen to wash the dishes, but my heart was dry. I thought about the phrase, pick your battles. And then I wondered, a battle picked for whose benefit? For this family to maintain its facade, or for me to maintain my sanity? A few days later, Eleanor was talking to a neighbor over the gate. In our community, the walls were high, but gossip traveled freely. Eleanor leaned against the iron gate, her voice carrying across the lawn. We have some good news coming. My Ethan is about to close a huge deal. They say he'll be promoted right after. When that happens, a certain daughter-in-law will have to learn her place. You can't put a cheap fork at a table set with sterling silver. The neighbor just chuckled, pretending not to understand the jab. But I was standing in the yard, and I heard every word. A strange, numb kind of amusement washed over me. In Eleanor's eyes, I was a disposable item. That evening, Ethan was on another call. He thought I was in the bathroom, giving our son a bath, so he spoke more loudly. I had taken our son out onto the balcony for some fresh air and overheard fragments of the conversation drifting up from his office below. Just get them to sign. We'll clean up the numbers later. Bad debt? I'll park it somewhere else. Don't worry. And then, the line that made me grip the railing until my knuckles were white. This quarter's profit has to hit 15%. No 15%. No bonus. Asterisk bonus. Asterisk so it was clear. Ethan wasn't just trying to make the company look good. He was fabricating results for a payout. People say greed is a fatal flaw, but the greedy often think they're just being clever, just being flexible. They only realize the noose is tightening when it's already around their neck. I noted the time. The very next day, I sent a secure message to Michael in internal audit. * need to cross-reference our new vendor list, specifically Apex Solutions. Also, run a query on all manual adjustments to profit data in the ERP system over the last month. * I kept it short and to the point. In these matters, fewer words are better. Some of the data adjustments occurred at the exact times Ethan was in the office. Some of the payments went out and then circled back through a series of intermediary accounts, like money taking a vacation before returning home. If you just told the story, it would sound like gossip. But when it's documented in system logs and bank statements, it's no longer a matter for debate. At home, Ethan continued to play the hero. He told Eleanor, "Mom, once this deal is signed, you can buy whatever you want." Eleanor, ecstatic, turned to me. "You see? A woman's fortune is tied to her husband. You just be a good little wife and enjoy the ride." I looked at her, not with anger, but with pity. Pity for a mindset that measured a person's worth in dollars. They say you can't outsmart fate. Perhaps Eleanor forgot that sometimes fate comes in the form of laws, evidence, and processes that can't be charmed or bribed. That night, when the house was quiet, I opened my journal. I didn't write about the kitchen. I wrote about my son, about his future. I didn't want him to grow up in a home where his mother was disrespected, where he was taught that money could buy respect. Nor did I want him to witness his mother screaming and fighting for justice. I wanted him to see his mother stand tall and win with integrity. I put down my pen and closed the journal. Outside, the air conditioner hummed. Inside me, a different kind of quiet had settled. A quiet readiness, a quiet determination that when everything came to light, no one could accuse me of being an emotional woman. And I knew that sooner or later, this family would have to listen to the echo of their own words. Only this time, they wouldn't be laughing. In a house like this, the most intoxicating thing isn't the wine. It's the feeling of being in control. Ethan sat in the living room, speaking as if the entire deal was already gift-wrapped in his briefcase. Eleanor grew more smug by the minute, her eyes flicking toward the front door as if waiting for a neighbor to pass by so she could drop a casual boast. I was no longer in the kitchen. I had moved to a recessed part of the hallway, where I could see the living room through the slats of the decorative screen. From that vantage point, I could hear Ethan clearly without being accused of showing my face. It's funny. In some homes, a daughter-in-law's place is as clearly defined as where you keep the broom. Ethan raised his glass of water, his voice full of excitement. "Mr. Thompson, you can rest easy. My team is efficient. We'll head to headquarters for the signing, and I promise you won't have to wait a minute." Mr. Thompson didn't raise his glass in a toast. He just touched it politely. Some people are hardest to read when they show the least emotion, but I could see the vigilance in his eyes, the caution of a man who had seen many a sure thing fall apart. Eleanor interjected again, her voice syrupy sweet. "It's such an honor to have you in our home, Mr. Thompson. It must be our good fortune. My Ethan is so busy, but he insisted on hosting you personally. That's how much he values this relationship." Mr. Thompson smiled. "Relationships are indeed valuable, ma'am. But in business, clarity is paramount." The word clarity landed softly, but it made Ethan flinch. He quickly recovered. Of course, and I am nothing if not transparent." I heard the word transparent and almost scoffed. The people who talk the most about transparency are often the ones who fear the light. The truly transparent ones just show you the paperwork. As he spoke, Ethan smoothed the cuff of his shirt, a telltale gesture he made whenever he wanted to project an image of control. Eleanor looked at her son with the kind of pride one reserves for a monument. I wondered, if the monument is hollow, who will be the first to run when it starts to crumble? At 10:55 a.m. I knew the time, not because I was being dramatic, but because I had preset the system trigger myself. It was a deadline. If nothing happened, then times, I would have to worry. If it did, it was just the process running its course. A notification pinged from Ethan's phone. The sound was quiet, but in the air-conditioned hush of the living room, it was as loud as a pin dropping. Ethan glanced at his screen, a smile still on his face. The smile froze for less than a second, then melted like it had been hit with ice water. He slapped the phone face down on the table, a movement so abrupt it was almost violent, causing a small spoon to rattle in its saucer. Eleanor flinched. "What is it, dear?" Ethan forced a steady voice. "Nothing, Mom. Just a system glitch." Mr. Thompson looked directly at Ethan. He didn't ask a question, but his silence was more unnerving than any interrogation. It's terrifying when the person you're trying to deceive refuses to be led. Ethan's phone vibrated again, and then again, as if someone was using it as a drum. He covered the screen with his hand, his eyes darting around. I could see a sheen of sweat on his temple, despite the cold air. He tried another weak smile. "My apologies, Mr. Thompson. Our IT department must be doing some maintenance. It'll be sorted out by the time we get to the office." Mr. Thompson picked up his coffee cup, took a small sip, and set it down gently. He asked a single, casual-sounding question that was anything but. "Maintenance? Timed for the exact moment we're about to sign a major contract?" Ethan was speechless for a half-second before blurting out, "Just a coincidence, I'm sure." Coincidence? In this world, too many coincidences start to look like a plan. His phone kept vibrating. This time, he couldn't hide it. The screen lit up with a bright red notification that glowed through his fingers. I couldn't see the words, but I knew what they said. The words a man like Ethan fears most. Asterisk access denied. Account suspended. Asterisk. He shot up from his chair, its legs scraping loudly against the marble floor. He grabbed his phone and moved away, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper, but his panic was obvious. "Hello? Why is my access locked? Who authorized this?" "No, I don't approve. I'm with a client." His final plea, "I'm with a client," sounded less like a command and more like a desperate appeal. Just moments ago, he had been promising Mr. Thompson he wouldn't have to wait. Now, he was the one being forced to wait, by some invisible authority. Eleanor turned to Mr. Thompson, trying to smooth things over. "You know how it is, being a top executive. The staff bothers you over every little thing." Mr. Thompson didn't play along. He simply glanced at her, then down at his own phone on the table. I saw him wake the screen, a habitual move for a businessman sensing trouble. He didn't say anything, but his posture had changed. He was no longer a guest making small talk. He was a professional assessing a risk. Ethan returned, his face ashen. He swallowed hard, his eyes blinking rapidly like someone sleep-deprived, but his pride was still intact. He forced himself to sound in control. "Mr. Thompson, if you'll excuse me, I have to take an urgent call from the office. I'll be 2 minutes." Mr. Thompson nodded politely. "Take your time." Ethan practically fled toward the front door, not to escape his guest, but to escape the feeling of his authority slipping away right in front of him. Eleanor watched him go, her lips pressed into a thin line, a flicker of worry in her eyes that she tried to conceal. The moment Ethan was gone, the living room fell silent. So silent I could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, each tick a cold, steady beat. Mr. Thompson turned to Eleanor, his tone still pleasant, but his words sharp. "Ma'am, for a contract of this magnitude, doesn't Nexus Logistics usually have their legal counsel present? I find it unusual that Ethan is hosting this meeting at home, alone." Eleanor was caught off guard. She was used to men talking business, while she sat and smiled. Faced with a direct question, she was like a dancer whose music had just stopped. She fumbled for an answer. "Oh, well, Ethan is very proactive. He wanted to extend the proper hospitality to you personally." Mr. Thompson gave a noncommittal "I see," but it was clear he didn't believe her. I saw his eyes flick toward the hallway where I was standing, hidden. He couldn't see me, but it was as if he was putting the pieces together. The lavish house, the boasting mother, the overconfident husband, and a system that had just slammed on the brakes. I didn't step out. I didn't smile to myself. I just breathed evenly, like a driver gripping the wheel as the car begins to skid. I knew this was just the beginning. The real pain would come when Ethan started grasping for anything to stop his fall. And when people grasp in a panic, they often pull everything they've tried to hide out into the open with them. The sound of a car door slamming echoed from the driveway. Ethan was outside, on the phone, desperately searching for a lifeline. Inside, Mr. Thompson sat calmly, as still as a deep pool of water. Eleanor began to fidget, her fingers twisting the lid of the sugar bowl, which I now noticed had a tiny chip. I looked at the apron, still hanging neatly on the chair in the kitchen, and thought to myself, a clear conscience fears no accusation. The person who should be afraid wasn't me. The person who should be afraid was running around outside. As soon as Ethan was out in the yard, the living room felt like it had been vacuum sealed. Eleanor remained on the sofa, but her regal posture had deflated. She kept twisting the lid of the china sugar bowl, her red-painted fingernails trembling slightly. Some people spend their whole lives accustomed to being in charge. When they encounter a situation beyond their control, they can only cling to inanimate objects. Mr. Thompson didn't get up. He sat straight, his hands resting on his knees, his expression unnervingly calm. It was the composure of a man who had weathered so many storms that he no longer let emotion dictate his actions. I stayed hidden in the hallway. I knew that in the world of high-stakes business, a single piece of information could flip the entire chessboard, and I was waiting for precisely that moment. Mr. Thompson's phone buzzed softly on the table. It wasn't loud, but it made Eleanor jump as if her name had been called. He picked it up, glanced at the screen, and his brow furrowed almost imperceptibly. He didn't open the notification right away. He read the subject line first, a habit of anyone who needs to verify the source. His eyes scanned a few words and then stopped. Eleanor tried to force a smile, her voice strained. Probably just the office confirming the signing time, right? Such a busy day. Mr. Thompson remained polite. I've just received a priority email. The word priority silenced Eleanor. I saw her swallow, her throat bobbing. In life, people fear things with red stamps, bold letters, or the kind of notifications no one dares to ignore. Mr. Thompson opened the email. I couldn't see the screen, but I saw his hand pause as he scrolled down to the attachment. He tapped to download a PDF and began to read, his eyes moving quickly, like a man accustomed to parsing legal documents. When he finished, he didn't exclaim or react dramatically. He simply let out a very quiet, thin breath. It was the breath of a man who had just narrowly avoided a catastrophe. Eleanor was bursting with anxiety, but still tried to maintain her composure. Is something wrong? My Ethan has been with Nexus Logistics for years. It's probably just a technical issue. Mr. Thompson looked up. His eyes held no gloating, no contempt, only a grave seriousness. He spoke slowly, enunciating each word as if he were reading a formal announcement. Nexus Logistics has just issued an urgent bulletin. They are indefinitely postponing the contract signing to protect their partners. The reason cited is the discovery of evidence of serious financial misconduct and concealment of project-related risks. Eleanor sat frozen like a statue, her face draining of color. She still tried to deflect. Oh, that must be a misunderstanding. My son is an honest businessman. Mr. Thompson didn't argue. He just lowered his voice slightly, but his words landed with more weight. The bulletin explicitly names the individual under review. Vice President of Sales, Mr. Ethan Carter. The name Ethan Carter fell into the room, and the air conditioning seemed to malfunction, a different kind of chill setting in. Eleanor opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked down at the sugar bowl lid as if it were an escape route. I saw her hand clench so tightly, her knuckles turned white. Then, Mr. Thompson glanced back at the document, as if to confirm the most crucial detail. He read the signature line aloud, his voice not loud, but clear enough for both Eleanor and me to hear. Electronically signed, Amelia Harris, Chief Executive Officer. The china lid slipped from Eleanor's hand. It hit the marble floor with a sharp, clean times crack asterisk. The sound wasn't as loud as a shattering plate, but it was decisive. White porcelain fragments scattered like glittering pieces of her shattered pride. Eleanor stared at the broken pieces, her eyes wide, her lips trembling. She stammered, like someone who had just heard the name of a ghost. A coincidence? It must be a coincidence. My daughter-in-law is also named Amelia Harris, but she's just couldn't finish the sentence. The absurdity of it hung in the air. If it were a coincidence, why would that name be on a CEO's signature line? If she were just a simple wife, how could she have the authority to electronically kill a multi-million-dollar deal moments before it was signed? You can lie to yourself once, maybe twice. To continue lying in the face of this was pure desperation. Mr. Thompson didn't smile. He placed his phone on the table and looked around the living room. His gaze was no longer that of a guest. It was the look of someone piecing together a puzzle. The lavish chandelier, the expensive sofa, Ethan's boastful words, Eleanor's condescending treatment of her daughter-in-law, it all suddenly clicked into place, forming a bizarre picture, like a beautiful silk robe draped over a shivering, deceitful body. He stood up and straightened his jacket. He looked directly at Eleanor and spoke with deliberate courtesy. "Ma'am, I believe you should call your son back inside immediately. And, if I may, I would like to ask where Miss Amelia Harris is." Eleanor's head snapped toward the kitchen, a reflexive action, as if the question itself had pulled her out of her stupor. She opened her mouth to shout, but the command got stuck in her throat. The confidence she had used to order me around was gone. She just gasped for air, her eyes darting toward the hallway where I stood concealed. I still didn't emerge. Not because I wanted to prolong their fear, but because I needed the sequence of events to be perfectly clear. The partner had read the official notice, understood the reason for the postponement, and confirmed the person in charge. With everything laid out in black and white, I didn't need to argue with words. From the yard, Ethan's voice drifted through the glass doors, frantic and fragmented. I could make out a few key phrases. Whose authority? Why is it locked? What do you mean? You can't. He sounded like a man trying to clutch at thin air. Mr. Thompson turned his face toward the kitchen doorway. His expression wasn't pleading, nor was it probing. It was the look of a man who wanted to speak to the person with real power, to have an honest conversation. I reached out and touched the latch on the kitchen's glass pocket door. It was cool to the touch. I pressed it. Asterisk. Click asterisk. The sound was small, but in the breathless room, it was as loud as a switch being thrown. I didn't look at the broken china on the floor. I looked straight ahead. Words can be carried away by the wind, but paperwork and signatures cannot. And when the signature appears, all the mouths that once spoke with contempt are suddenly silenced. I took one step out of the hallway. I wasn't rushed. I wasn't angry. It was simply time for me to stop standing in the shadows. As I stepped into the room, the first thing I felt wasn't their eyes on me, but the silence. A silence as thick as smoke, blanketing a room that was, until recently, filled with noise. Eleanor stood near the coffee table, her hand still hovering in the air, as if she could feel the ghost of the lid she'd just dropped. On the floor, the white porcelain shards lay scattered like the fragments of her broken pretense. I was no longer wearing the apron. I was dressed in a tailored black blazer and matching trousers. It wasn't a magic trick. I had it prepared, hanging in the small changing room off the kitchen, like a seasoned traveler who packs a raincoat before the storm arrives. Mr. Thompson looked at me, and his gaze was steady and direct. I met his eyes, not flinching, not looking away. I wasn't projecting glamour. I was projecting clarity. I took another step, positioning myself in the center of the living room, a place where I was no longer a shadow, but an equal. My voice was not loud, but it was firm. "Mr. Thompson, I apologize for the abruptness of this. Nexus Logistics has an internal issue that needed to be addressed. I am Amelia Harris." That one sentence seemed to suck all the air out of Eleanor. She opened her mouth, but no sound emerged. The command that had once so easily rolled off her tongue, "Get back in the kitchen," was now hopelessly stuck in her throat. Mr. Thompson straightened his posture and stepped forward. He extended his hand. It was not a gesture of appeasement. It was the formal handshake of one business principal to another. I took his hand. His grip was firm and warm. He spoke, his voice tinged with relief. "It is a pleasure to finally meet you, Miss Harris. You just saved me from walking into a minefield." I gave a slight nod. I didn't need praise. I needed our partner to understand. Nexus Logistics does not hide its risks. We do not pass our problems on to others. Sometimes, in business, That's all that matters. Eleanor stood as if she'd been turned to stone. Moments ago, she had called me the help. Now, the very man she was trying to impress was shaking my hand with deference. I glanced at her for a second. Just 1 second. I didn't offer a single sarcastic word. I let the truth do its own work. I turned to the coffee table. I didn't touch the broken china. I just picked up a napkin and placed it neatly next to the coffee pot. Even in chaos, I maintained my habits. Everything in its proper place. People call it being a perfectionist. Sometimes, that perfectionism is what saves you from disaster. The notice of postponement was sent to protect you, Mr. Thompson, I continued, my voice even. At 11:30, if you are amenable, we can meet at our headquarters. My team has already prepared a revised proposal, complete with enhanced risk management clauses and fully transparent data. Mr. Thompson nodded. I appreciate your methods, Miss Harris. Most companies would try to hide their problems. You stopped everything to clean house. Hearing the phrase clean house, Eleanor staggered. She looked like someone waking from a dream she didn't want to believe. She stammered, her voice broken. Amelia, my child. I didn't answer her as a daughter-in-law. I just looked at her and spoke a single sentence, soft but clear, to let her know the world had shifted. Eleanor, we can discuss family matters later. Right now, I am speaking with a business partner. I didn't use harsh words, but calling her Eleanor instead of Mom was a line drawn in the sand. In any family, a change in address is a change in heart. Eleanor's face flushed, but she didn't dare protest. Not with Mr. Thompson standing right there. Just then, the sound of a car door slamming echoed from the driveway, followed by the main door bursting open. I knew it was Ethan, returning from his frantic phone calls, still reeling without a plan. Before the door was fully open, I wanted to say one small thing to all the good people listening to this. If you've followed the story this far and feel that fire in your gut, please give a like to support the Serenity Years channel. And please, leave a comment. If you were in my shoes, would you choose to stay silent for the sake of peace? Or would you stand tall for the sake of your dignity? Please listen to the end, because the truths yet to be revealed are more shocking than you can imagine. The front door flew open. Ethan stormed in, his face pale, his tie askew, his hair a mess as if he'd been caught in a windstorm. The moment he saw me standing in the middle of the living room in a blazer, facing Mr. Thompson, he stopped dead in his tracks, as if someone had slammed on his brakes. A second later, his reaction was an apology, but aggression. "What the hell are you doing?" he snarled, his eyes bloodshot. "Did you hack the system? Are you trying to sabotage my deal? Are you insane?" Mr. Thompson took a half step back, wisely not getting involved. He was smart enough to know that a family dispute had to be handled by the family, but he was also savvy enough to stand as a witness to Ethan's behavior. Ethan turned to him, desperate to salvage his reputation. "Thompson, don't listen to her. She's been at home too long. She gets these crazy ideas. Let me handle this." I looked at Ethan, not with fiery anger, but with a cold clarity. Even now, he was trying to bend reality with words. My voice was steady. "Ethan, you just referred to me as her in front of our business partner. So, let's handle this with paperwork, shall we?" I walked to the side table where I'd left a thin file folder I had prepared earlier. I didn't pull it out to be dramatic. I placed it on the coffee table like a chess player making a decisive move. Ethan stared at the folder, his eyes blinking rapidly. Eleanor stood behind him, wanting to defend her son, but silenced by Mr. Thompson's presence. I didn't open the folder just yet. I rested my hand on it, looked directly at Ethan, and spoke with the clear procedural tone of a lawyer. "Calm down. If you've done nothing wrong, this paperwork will protect you. If you have, it will put you where you belong." The air in the room grew taut. Ethan clenched his fists, as if wanting to snatch the folder, but he didn't dare. Not with Mr. Thompson watching, and not with the fear of what was inside. I remained still, a person who had already chosen how this play would end. Ethan took a hesitant step forward, his hand raising as if to grab the file, then stopping. He looked at Mr. Thompson, at his mother, then at me. His expression was a chaotic mix of confusion and panic. the look of a man who has just discovered the ground beneath his feet is no longer solid. "Are you trying to humiliate me in front of an outsider?" he hissed. "Who do you think you are, lecturing me? I'm your husband." I didn't answer immediately. I pulled out a single chair from the dining set, placed it by the coffee table, and sat down, my back straight. For too long, I had been forced to stand in the shadows. Now, I would sit at the center, where every word had to pass through me. I tapped my finger on the folder. "Do you want to have this conversation based on titles or based on facts?" His eyes widened. "The fact is, you sabotaged my work." I gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, as if logging his statement for later. "Then let's review the facts." I opened the folder, not with a dramatic flourish, but with slow deliberation, letting each black and white page speak for itself. The first page was the summary report from the internal audit, signed by Michael, dated, with a case number. I didn't read the whole thing. I read the conclusion. During the period from the beginning of last month to the present, the audit has identified evidence of the creation of a shell vendor, the issuance of fraudulent invoices, and the manipulation of profit data to conceal non-performing debt risks. Eleanor gasped. "What? That's impossible." "My son is an honest man," Ethan snapped at her. "Mom, be quiet." With that one sentence, Eleanor's queen mother persona deflated like a punctured balloon. She tried to speak again, but she caught Mr. Thompson's eye and swallowed her words. I turned to the second page, a transaction flow chart. I didn't read out the dollar amounts. I pointed to the anomalies, dates, times, source accounts, destination accounts, and the circular path they took. Payments to Apex Solutions for ancillary cold storage services were routed through an intermediary account before a portion of the funds returned here. The payment amounts do not align with the signed-off work orders. Ethan forced a sneer, but it sounded as thin as paper. "You're making this up. Where did you get this?" I looked up at him. "From the Nexus logistics system. The access logs show your username, and the bank statements were obtained through an official request from our legal department." Mr. Thompson's brow furrowed slightly. He remained silent, but I could see his shoulders tense, the posture of a man who just realized he almost signed a deal that could have dragged him through the mud. Ethan changed tactics, his voice rising. "The accounting department handles cash flow. I'm in sales. Don't pin this on me." I didn't argue. I simply turned to the next page, a transcript of an audio log, time-stamped, with a reference to the security camera footage from the third-floor hallway and the file's server location. I read just one line, enough to make the point. "I need you to recategorize those expenses. The profit margin times has times to hit 15%. If we get the deal, we all get a bonus." The color drained from Ethan's face. He opened his mouth, but no credible denial came out. It was his voice, his words. There was no escaping it. Eleanor began to breathe heavily. She looked at me, her expression shifting from confusion to fear. She suddenly turned to Mr. Thompson, her smile a grotesque mask, trying to patch the sinking ship. "Oh, it's just an internal matter. A misunderstanding, I'm sure. Men in business sometimes make small mistakes." Mr. Thompson placed his hand on the arm of the chair, his voice still polite, but now icy. "Ma'am, there is a difference between a mistake and a deliberate action. I need to know where I stand." The phrase "where I stand" was like a bucket of cold water on Ethan. He turned back to me, his eyes red with a mixture of rage and terror. "What do you want? Are you not happy until you've destroyed me?" I set the papers down. I spoke slowly, each word deliberate. "I want Nexus Logistics to be clean. I want our partners not to be deceived, and I want no one in this house to ever have the right to call me the help again." Ethan flinched, as if just now remembering the words he had thrown at me that morning. He tried to deflect, falling back on a familiar accusation. "You're being petty. You're destroying my career, over a few careless words." I looked at him, not with ridicule, but with a genuine question. "If you had signed this deal today, would you have come home and thanked me? Or would you have told me to make myself scarce again?" He was silent. The silence was his answer. It was so obvious, he couldn't even lie about it in front of a stranger. I turned to the last page of the evidence file, A system action log. It detailed his login times, the reports he had modified, the files he had exported, and the digital watermark. I didn't need to read it. I just pointed to the bottom line, where his username, *E, Carter *, was clearly listed. From this moment on, I said, you can no longer claim you didn't know. The system recorded everything. Ethan stood frozen, then suddenly snarled, like a cornered animal. You think you've won? You do this, and you'll tear this family apart. When I lose face, what will our son think of you? Eleanor, hearing the mention of her grandson, seized the opportunity. That's right. Think of the child. A woman's greatest virtue is forgiveness. I turned to Eleanor. This time, I didn't stay silent. My voice was gentle, but my words were a mirror. You taught me to be forgiving, but you taught your son it was okay to disrespect his wife. That kind of forgiveness only enables cruelty. Eleanor was speechless, her eyes turning red with either anger or shame. Mr. Thompson took a half step back, maintaining a respectful distance. He looked at me and spoke concisely. Miss Harris, I understand the situation. I propose we continue all further discussions at your headquarters, according to official procedure. I will not be signing anything until your internal matters are resolved. I nodded. I respect that. Hearing the words not signing, Ethan lost his last foothold. He lunged toward the table, his voice dropping from a shout to a desperate, threatening whisper. Amelia, calm down. Let's talk about this in private. Whatever you want, I'll give it to you. Let's go to our room and talk. I looked at him, and for the first time that morning, I no longer saw the polished executive who had walked down the stairs. I saw a man terrified of losing everything. I closed the file, placing it squarely in front of me, a period at the end of a long, convoluted sentence. I didn't stand up. I didn't move closer. I just said one simple thing, but it landed with the weight of a stone. If you want to talk, talk here. In front of a witness. I don't want you claiming later that I made things up. Ethan's lips pressed into a thin line, his shoulders slumped. In that posture, I knew he understood. Some days, you don't fall because someone pushes you. You fall because you've walked too far out on a bridge built of lies. Ethan stood motionless for a long moment, and then his carefully constructed bravado shattered. He swallowed hard, his eyes flicking from Mr. Thompson to me, his voice now a hoarse whisper. Amelia, please don't do this. Don't push me into a corner. I was wrong. I'm sorry. I didn't answer right away. I just looked at him, my expression unreadable. People think women are weak because they are quick to soften, but sometimes softening is just another way of letting yourself be pushed back down. I had been down for too long. I wasn't going back. Ethan took another step, reaching out his hand as if to pull me into a private conspiracy. I moved back half a step, just enough for his hand to grasp at empty air. He froze. Then, in a sudden, shocking movement, he dropped to his knees. It wasn't a graceful, cinematic kneel. It was the clumsy, desperate collapse of a man in full panic. His knees hit the hard marble with a dull thud. He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. I'm begging you. Don't ruin me. Think of our son. Think of my mother. Eleanor, who had been standing as if frozen, snapped back to life at the sight of her kneeling son. But instead of scolding him for his weakness, her maternal instinct for self-preservation kicked in. She rushed forward, her voice suddenly dripping with a sweetness I hadn't heard in years. Oh, Amelia, dear, please. Let's just talk this through. I'm an old woman. I can't handle this. I looked at her. That dear, if she had said it a few months ago, might have warmed my heart. But said now, at this exact moment, it felt like being handed a paper towel after someone has just thrown mud in your face. It might wipe away the dirt, but it doesn't erase the insult. I placed my hands on the arms of the chair and stood up, not to assert dominance, but to end the spectacle. My voice was even, devoid of triumph. Get up, Ethan. I don't need anyone kneeling to me. He looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. So you'll forgive me? I shook my head slightly. I told you to get up because this isn't a soap opera. As for forgiveness, that's a matter for the process. The word process was like salt in his wound. He shot back, his voice trembling. Always the process. You treat me like a stranger, not your husband. I didn't counter with logic. I just asked a simple question. When you called me that woman in front of our guest, were you treating me like your wife? He opened his mouth, then closed it. His silence was more damning than any argument. Some words can't be taken back. You can only live with their consequences. Eleanor, seeing her son falter, jumped in, a mix of pleading and scolding in her tone. Men say stupid things when they're stressed. Don't hold it against him. Family matters should be kept behind closed doors. I turned to her, my voice calm. You taught me to keep things behind closed doors, but this morning, you deliberately spoke loud enough for a guest to hear who you thought I was. Eleanor's face went rigid, her lips twitching. For the first time, perhaps, she understood that the words you throw out into the world have a way of coming back to you. Mr. Thompson remained a silent, respectful observer. His presence was a mirror, and in it, Ethan couldn't lie, and Eleanor couldn't perform. I opened my handbag and took out another, thinner file. This wasn't an audit report. It was a personal file, one I had prepared long ago but had hoped I would never have to use. I placed it on the table next to the evidence file, two distinct paths laid out before Ethan. This is our part. Ethan stared at it. What is this? I answered simply. Divorce papers. Eleanor cried out. What? Ethan stood as if he'd been slapped. I didn't raise my voice. I just opened the file to show him two sets of documents, one for an uncontested dissolution and one for a contested filing. He lunged forward as if to grab them, but stopped short, perhaps fearing that touching the paper was like touching a blade. He snarled, Are you threatening me? I shook my head. I'm not threatening you. I'm giving you a choice. Eleanor stammered. Husbands and wives fight. You don't just get a divorce. I looked from her to Ethan, my voice as steady as if I were stating a fact from a textbook. Fighting is about a broken dish, disrespect, deceit, and turning your wife into a ghost in her own home. That's not a fight. That's a foundation crumbling. Ethan tried to regain some semblance of control. I won't sign. What are you going to do then? I nodded calmly. If you don't agree to an uncontested dissolution, I will file a contested divorce. With sufficient grounds, the court will proceed. This isn't a game, Ethan. Your signature just determines how cleanly this ends. He seemed to deflate. He stared at me, then abruptly changed his tone to one of placation. What do you want? Money? Status? I'll change. I'll respect you. I swear. A small, sad smile touched my lips. I remembered all the days I had stood in the kitchen, being taught to know my place. I answered softly. Your talk of respect now sounds like a clearance sale at a department store. The price was high when you thought you had a buyer, but now that you're desperate, you'll sell it for anything. His face flushed with shame. Eleanor started to argue but stopped, because the analogy was a perfect description of their own behavior. I pushed the uncontested papers toward him, within his reach. If you sign this, it ends quietly. You get to keep a shred of dignity. You won't have to endure a messy public battle. I gestured to the other set. If you drag this out, I will take the other path. And given what you've done at the company, I think you know you have no leverage left to bargain with. He went pale. He looked from the divorce papers to the evidence file, like a man staring at two locked doors. Eleanor gasped, her voice dropping. Amelia, are you trying to leave me and my son with nothing? I looked at her, my heart no longer burning. I just felt tired. Tired of people who only learned to value you when you held their fate in your hands. I spoke slowly. I'm not leaving anyone with nothing. I am just stopping at the right place. Everyone reaps what they sow. With that, I withdrew my hand and stood tall. The air conditioner hummed, but no one felt its coolness. Ethan remained frozen, his eyes glued to the two files. Mr. Thompson looked at me with an expression of understanding. From this point on, everything would be dictated by documents and facts, not by persuasion or pity. Ethan was silent for a long moment. Then, the pleading look vanished, replaced by a flash of avarice. Greed, it seems, can outrun fear. He stared at the divorce papers, his eyes narrowing. A divorce means we split the assets. This house, the cars, the savings accounts, the stock options. Don't think you can just take whatever you want. Eleanor, hearing the words split the assets, was instantly revived. She stepped forward, her earlier tears forgotten. That's right. Marital property is shared property. He's my son. He has his share. This house was built on his success. I didn't scowl. I didn't retort with a sarcastic, "Oh, really?" I just looked at them, then at the broken china on the floor. The biggest thing broken in this house, I thought, wasn't the sugar bowl. It was trust. I placed my hand on the file and turned it to face Ethan. Ethan, let's be clear. A divorce does require the division of assets, according to the law. But what constitutes marital property versus separate property is not determined by what you'd times it to be. He challenged me. You think you're so smart? Prove it. Fine. I didn't reach for a thick binder of documents. I simply pulled out the necessary pages I had already prepared within the file. The first was the incorporation document for the LLC that owned the mansion. I placed it squarely on the table. This house is designated as corporate housing. It is owned by Nexus Realty, an LLC I established and fully funded with my own premarital assets. You were permitted to live here as part of your executive compensation package. It is not your personal property, and it is certainly not marital property to be divided. Eleanor's jaw dropped. Corporate housing? What are you talking about? This is my son's house. The whole neighborhood knows it. I looked at her, my voice unwavering. What the neighborhood knows is gossip. What the paperwork says is law. Ethan snatched the document, his hand trembling as he read it. He had likely never imagined that his family home was recorded in the cold, impersonal language of a legal entity. He threw the paper down. What about the car? The one I drive every day. It's registered in my name. I produced another sheet of paper. It was the company vehicle assignment form, detailing the car's VIN, the terms of use, and the repossession clause upon termination of employment. The car you are driving is a company lease, assigned to the VP of Sales. This morning, a repossession order was issued. The key fob has been deactivated. Your right to use that vehicle ended when your employment was suspended. Ethan's jaw tightened. Eleanor pointed a trembling finger at me, her voice rising to a shriek. You deceived this entire family. I wasn't startled by her accusation. I just found it familiar, like the sting of 1,000 small cuts to my self-respect over the years. I replied calmly. So calmly it only fueled her rage. I didn't deceive anyone. I simply chose not to disclose. I wanted to see how you and Ethan would treat me if you thought I had nothing. Eleanor's face turned crimson. She was about to unleash a torrent of insults, but with Mr. Thompson still present, she swallowed them and switched to a wail. What about the savings? The money in the bank is marital money, isn't it? I turned to Ethan. Which accounts are you referring to? He jutted his chin out. All of it. The household accounts, the investment accounts. You're my wife. You have to split it. I tilted my head slightly. The household account, and any assets acquired during our marriage through legitimate means, will be handled according to state law. However, any accounts linked to the irregular financial activities have been frozen pending the internal investigation. That wasn't my decision. It's mandatory procedure when there is evidence of fraud. Ethan went pale. You called the police? I shook my head. I notified internal audit and legal. Whether they forward the file to the authorities will depend on their findings. The word findings made Ethan gasp for air. He looked at Mr. Thompson for support, but Mr. Thompson was not his savior. The man spoke in a measured, professional tone. I have no interest in your family matters, but if there is evidence of criminal misconduct affecting our potential partnership, I am obligated to protect my company. That statement was the final nail in the coffin of Ethan's hopes. He turned back to me, his voice low and venomous. You've gone too far. You want me to end up with nothing. I looked him straight in the eye. Whether you end up with nothing depends on what you did with your own 2 hands. Eleanor erupted. What kind of woman is so cruel? Blood is thicker than water. How could you send your own husband to jail? I sighed softly. I didn't want to engage in a battle of proverbs, but I answered with something my own mother used to say. Eleanor, you're taught to love others as you love yourself, but love doesn't mean covering up a crime. I gathered the papers, stacked them neatly, and delivered the final instructions, my voice clear and devoid of emotion. This afternoon, our asset management and legal teams will be here to conduct an official inventory and reclaim the corporate property. I am giving you 48 hours to pack your personal belongings. The Homeowners Association representative and a local police officer will be present as witnesses to ensure everything is done properly and without incident. Hearing police officer, Eleanor's face turned white. She immediately switched back to pleading. Amelia, dear, please, why do we need the police? It will be so humiliating. I shook my head. Witnesses ensure there are no false accusations later. I don't want to hear a different story tomorrow. Invented for the neighbors. Ethan laughed, a dry, humorless sound. You're afraid I'll invent a story? I looked at him and repeated his own words from that morning without adding a single embellishment. A woman in the living room messes things up. Remember? He was silenced. Eleanor turned away, her lips pressed into a thin, hard line. I didn't need to mention the help comment again. I knew that when people lose their home, their car, and their power, they remember those words on their own. Mr. Thompson checked his watch. Miss Harris, I'll see you at headquarters at 11:30. I want this new agreement finalized today. Of course. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. As he left, the living room felt vast and empty. Ethan watched the door close, then turned to me, his voice a low growl. You're clever. You won, but you'll regret this. I didn't offer a challenge in return. I just said one thing to end the negotiation. The only thing I regret is ever thinking I could earn respect by being compliant. Outside, the sun was still beating down, but inside this house, the heat was nothing compared to the cold, hard truth. It was a cold that left you with nowhere to hide. That afternoon, the Connecticut sun still bore down on the roof, but inside the mansion, the air was cold and dry, the kind of cold that comes with legal documents being laid on a table. I hadn't stayed to listen to Ethan's rants. I went to headquarters, finalized the revised, risk-protected agreement with Mr. Thompson, and returned just before the asset recovery team was scheduled to arrive. I wasn't being sentimental about the house. I just wanted to ensure the process was clean, to prevent anyone from fabricating a story about me storming in with thugs. I had asked David from legal to arrive at 3 p.m. sharp, with the official repossession order, the handover checklist, and the corporate asset inventory. His reply was a concise, understood. That single word, from a lawyer, carried the weight of finality. At 2:50 p.m., a car pulled up to the gate. I stood in the living room, dressed not in a power suit, but in a simple shirt and dark pants. I wanted this family to see me as a professional, not a vengeful ex. The doorbell rang. I opened it. First was David, in a crisp blue shirt, a leather briefcase at his side. Behind him was his paralegal, Sarah, holding a clipboard. They were accompanied by a man from asset management and, as I had requested, the head of the Homeowners Association and a local police officer. The HOA head was a man in his 50s, polite and measured. The officer was younger, his expression serious but not aggressive. The HOA head greeted me. Miss Harris, we're here to witness the inventory process as requested by your company, just to keep things clear and avoid any misunderstandings. I nodded. Thank you for coming. I just want everything to be done by the book, so it's fair to everyone. Just then, Eleanor descended the staircase. She had changed her clothes, and her hair was combed, but her eyes were red and swollen. The moment she saw the police officer, she froze, as if doused with cold water. It wasn't the fear of a uniform. It was the fear of public shame, of the neighborhood knowing she was being kicked out. She tried to sound indignant. What is the meaning of this? Why are you all here? David opened his briefcase and produced the order. Good afternoon, ma'am. We are representatives from the legal and asset management departments of Nexus Realty. We are here to conduct an official inventory and reclaim this corporate-owned property, as the terms of its use have changed. The phrase corporate-owned property was like a hammer blow. She spun around to face me. You're really going through with this? I didn't answer with an accusation. I just said, please listen to the proceedings. Ethan stormed out of his office. As if he'd been waiting for his cue, he immediately tried to escalate the situation. Who the hell let you into my house? Are you trying to start trouble? The police officer took a half step forward, his voice calm but firm. "Sir, please remain calm. We are only here to witness a civil matter at the request of the property owner. We are not here to enforce anything. If you have objections, you may state them for the official record." That one phrase, "for the official record," was enough to stop his tirade. Ethan choked for a moment, then fell back on his old script. "Record what? This is my house, my wife's and mine. I do not consent." The asset manager consulted his list. "Sir, you are occupying this property under the terms of a corporate housing agreement. As your executive position has been suspended, your right to occupy this residence is terminated. The repossession is in accordance with internal company policy and the legal rights of the property owner." Ethan's eyes blazed. "Amelia, you are a monster. You brought the police and the whole neighborhood here to shame me." I looked at him. "I brought them here so no one could shame anyone. If you have something to say it for the record." Seeing that her son's aggression was failing, Eleanor immediately switched to tears. "Officers, please, I'm an old woman. My grandson lives here. Please, just give us a little more time, maybe a week." The HOA head sighed. "Ma'am, this is a matter between the corporation and the resident. I'm just here as a witness. If you have a special request, you should make it to the company representatives." I gave a slight nod to the HOA head, then turned to David. "Give them the full 48 hours as stated in the notice. Prioritize their personal effects, documents, and anything belonging to my son to prevent anything from being misplaced." David made a note on the record. Ethan, seeing this small concession, thought he saw an opening. He softened his tone. "Then at least let me get my files from my office. They're important documents." I knew exactly what he wanted. I didn't accuse him of trying to steal anything. I just said, "You may take your personal papers. Any company documents will be inventoried by Mr. David's team before they leave the premises. Do not remove them yourself." He glared. "Are you investigating me?" "I'm following procedure." Suddenly, Ethan made a dash for his office, a primal instinct to grab what he could. David signaled to the asset manager to follow him. A few moments later, they returned. Ethan was clutching a stack of papers and a USB drive. David spoke clearly. "Mr. Carter is in possession of documents belonging to the company. We are recording this and will be taking them into our custody as per the handover protocol." In that moment, Ethan froze. The entire facade he had been trying to maintain all day collapsed. Eleanor couldn't even cry anymore. She just stared at her son as if he had been stripped naked in the town square. I didn't say a single cruel word. I simply signed the inventory report on the line for the property owner's representative, then passed the clipboard to Ethan. "Please review this. If you disagree with any item, state your objection in writing." Ethan's hand was shaking as he took the pen. He wanted to refuse to sign, to make one last stand. But with the HOA and the police watching, his refusal would change nothing. The record would still be made. Finally, he slammed the pen down. "I'm not signing." David calmly noted. "Resident has declined to sign after reviewing the document." The HOA head signed as a witness. The police officer signed and added his department's stamp. The process was as neat and final as closing a locked door. As the team prepared to leave, Eleanor followed me, her voice trembling. "Amelia, are you really going to watch us be thrown out onto the street?" I didn't turn back. I just said something to make her understand the price of her own behavior. "You once told me to know my place. Today, I am just helping everyone remember that we all have our own place to keep." I walked them to the door and locked it behind them. The house was now occupied by just me, Ethan, Eleanor, and a heavy silence. There were no more boasts, no more applause, only the hum of the air conditioner and the ragged breathing of people who had just realized that some things, once lost, are lost forever. Not because someone was cruel, but because they had taken them for granted for far too long. The moment the door clicked shut, Ethan slammed his hand on the dining table. The sound echoed in the empty room like a crack in dry wood. He was no longer performing for an audience. Now, he directed all his fury at me. "You're proud of yourself, aren't you?" he hissed, his lip trembling. "You bring the police, the neighbors. What's next? Are you going to tell the whole world I'm a thief?" I looked at him, my voice flat. The world doesn't need me to tell them anything. The official record has been signed. He let out a sharp, grating laugh. The record? It's all orchestrated by you. You're the CEO. You can make anyone sign anything. I didn't engage with that argument. Trying to reason with him now would be pointless. I just stated the fact. You were given the opportunity to state your objections. You refused. That, too, is part of the record. Eleanor collapsed onto the sofa, clutching her chest. But seconds later, she shot up, driven by a lifetime of worrying about appearances. She marched to the front door, threw it open, and shouted to the street. "Everyone, come and see! My own daughter-in-law is throwing us out of our home." I remained still. I didn't rush to close the door. I knew that if I did, the scene would become exactly what she wanted. The hysterical, abusive daughter-in-law. I wouldn't give her that satisfaction. Ethan, seeing his mother's opening, immediately joined in. He pulled out his phone and started making frantic calls, his voice thick with manufactured despair. "Mike? It's Ethan. You have to help me. Amelia, she's been hiding who she is for years. Now she's making her move, trying to take everything. Can you come over? Just talk some sense into her." I recognized the name. One of Ethan's golfing buddies, a man who liked to talk big. Ethan called one person after another, sending out a volley of texts. "I'm being set up. I'm in trouble. My wife is destroying me." He was trying to summon a mob, to create pressure, to make me back down. But this wasn't a bar fight. People only rush to your side when they know they can benefit, or at least not get hurt. The moment they smell lawyers and internal audits, they tend to step back. Just as I expected, the first person Ethan called paused, then mumbled, "Listen, man, I'm kind of busy right now. I'll see what I can do." The second call was shorter. "This sounds like a family thing, Ethan. You guys handle it." The third call went straight to voicemail. Ethan's face flushed. He couldn't accept that he was being abandoned. He turned on me, spitting out another accusation. "You see? Because of you, I'm losing all my friends." I asked softly. "Or is it because they're afraid of being implicated?" He was speechless. He turned away and grabbed his mother. "Mom, let's go. We have to tell the whole neighborhood how cruel she is." Eleanor was ready. She pulled out a tissue, dabbed at her dry eyes, and marched out to the gate, telling anyone who would listen a well-rehearsed story about the deceitful daughter-in-law who had tricked her husband and was now stealing all his assets. The story sounded dramatic, but it had holes. A practical neighbor asked, "So, whose name is on the deed?" "Eleanor." She faltered. "Well, it's their house." Another neighbor added quietly, "I saw the legal team here earlier. With the HOA, they had official papers. It looked pretty legitimate to me." Eleanor's face fell. She quickly changed her story, appealing to emotion. "But she has everything. I'm an old woman. She has no pity." I listened from inside, feeling neither happy nor sad. I just saw clearly that Eleanor didn't need the truth. She needed an audience. But the audience in this neighborhood was different. They might enjoy the drama for a moment, but then they'd ask to see the paperwork. Ethan threw his phone on the table. "You think you're above the law. What you're doing is a violation of your duties as a wife." I looked at him and answered, my voice cutting through his cheap, moralizing. "My duties as a wife do not include covering up your crimes." He laughed contemptuously. "You talk a good game, but are you sure the company will back you? You're just the acting CEO. I'll go to the board of directors. I'll tell them you're abusing your power." I nodded, as if granting him permission to hope. "You do that." Then, I picked up my phone and sent a single text to my assistant. Asterisk. Release the internal communications memo as drafted. Forward to the relevant partner list. Asterisk. She replied instantly. Asterisk. Done. Asterisk. Less than 10 minutes later, Ethan's phone buzzed. It was an email from the Office of the Board of Directors, followed by the company-wide internal memo, asterisk suspension of duties. Immediate handover of all company property. System access revoked. A mandatory meeting with internal audit and legal has been scheduled. Asterisk. The language was cold, corporate, and absolute. After reading it, Ethan tried to log into the company network on his phone. The screen displayed a single, sterile message. Asterisk access denied. Asterisk. He threw his phone onto the sofa as if trying to throw away the truth itself. He roared, "What have you done? You've cut off my lifeline." I didn't argue. I just said, "Your lifeline was something you should have held onto when you had the chance." Eleanor ran back inside, her face a mask of anger and panic. "They don't believe me. They said there was a legal record." She turned to me. "Amelia, how could you be so evil?" I looked at her calmly. "Because this time, it's not a story you can just tell. It's written down." Eleanor froze, then her tone shifted to one of pleading. "Then please, just give me a few more days to find a place. I'm an old woman." I didn't throw her out on the spot. I just reminded her of the legally documented deadline, 48 hours. As per the official record, Ethan, seeing his mother's plea fail, tried a different attack. "You think you're so perfect? You hid who you were. You played the part of the simple wife. You're a hypocrite." I looked him straight in the eye. I was silent to protect the company and to see people for who they truly are. Hypocrisy is doing something wrong and then demanding others stay silent to protect you. He was silenced. He stood up and began pacing like a caged animal. Eleanor sat down, defeated, no longer having the energy to perform. The large house suddenly felt small, each of them trapped in a corner of their own making. I picked up my bag and checked my calendar on my phone. The boardroom at headquarters was ready. The legal team was reviewing the final clauses. My assistant had confirmed the schedule. I looked at the time and spoke concisely, without threat or sarcasm. "I'm going to the office. Pack your personal belongings as listed. Do not touch any corporate assets. I don't want to have to add another line to the official record." With that, I walked to the door. Behind me, Ethan stood, his mouth opening and closing, wanting to curse me, but perhaps fearing he would only be cursing his own future. Eleanor just watched me go, her eyes empty. Outside, the neighborhood gossip had died down. The story was no longer about a dramatic theft, but a boring repossession. I closed the door, not locking it, just letting it click shut. Inside me, something clicked too, locking away a chapter of my life I had endured for far too long. At 11:25 a.m., I walked through the lobby of the Nexus Logistics headquarters. The space was vast, the floors polished, the company logo a silent reminder on the main wall. This was a place where everything was measured by process, not by persuasion. I went straight to the executive elevator. Today, every minute counted. The VIP boardroom was ready. My assistant, Sarah, sat at the long table, a file of revised contract clauses in front of her. David from legal was there, his laptop open. Michael, from internal audit, sat quietly, his presence a silent guarantee that this process was clean. I took my seat at the head of the table and quickly reviewed the checklist. It was a habit, always reread the fine print before signing. In business, you don't fear difficulty, you fear ambiguity. At 11:28 a.m., Mr. Thompson arrived with his assistant. As he entered, he scanned the room, the people, the setup. His demeanor was much more relaxed than it had been at my house. Here, everything was in its proper place. No one was performing. I stood to shake his hand. This time, the handshake wasn't a surprise. It was a confirmation of a shared principle: transparency. "Thank you for being on time," I said. He nodded. "I appreciate punctuality, Miss Harris. And I appreciate proper procedure." The meeting began. David from legal laid out the revised terms. Nexus Logistics proposes 2 key amendments. First, a clause for enhanced risk monitoring, with the partner's right to pause the contract if new data discrepancies arise. Second, a commitment to full transparency on cash flow and work order verification, according to the agreed-upon standards. Mr. Thompson listened intently, making notes. He asked sharp, specific questions. Who has final sign-off on the spoilage reports? Are the data logs provided daily or weekly? What is the response time if a discrepancy is found? Each question was a lock, and each of our answers was a key, backed by written policy. At one point, he looked at me directly. "Miss Harris, I'd like to hear it from you. Why did you risk stopping the deal moments before signing? Many executives would have pushed it through and dealt with the fallout later. I answered honestly, because if I had signed, knowing there was a risk, I would have been handing a time bomb to you. I'm in the logistics business, Mr. Thompson. I know that one bad link can break the entire chain. I needed this chain to be clean from the start. He nodded slowly, as if setting down a heavy weight of doubt. That gives me confidence. The final documents were brought out. I signed first, my signature neat and efficient. Mr. Thompson signed second. The soft scratch of the pen on paper was a quiet sound, but to me, it was the sound of a door being shut on a major liability. It was 11:30 a.m., exactly on time. When it was done, there was no applause, no champagne. I just nodded. Thank you. My team will be in touch with the implementation schedule. Mr. Thompson replied, just keep doing business the way you did today, Miss Harris. I like working with people who take responsibility. The phrase, take responsibility, made me think of Ethan. He loved to talk about responsibility, but only when he was sitting in the seat of power. When it was time to actually be responsible, he just wanted to pull everyone else down with him. As Mr. Thompson stood to leave, he added one more thing, not as a compliment, but as an observation from a seasoned veteran. Miss Harris, I've met many executives who can talk a great game. I've met very few who are willing to cut out the rot in their own house to save the whole enterprise. I just smiled faintly. An old proverb came to mind. Bitter medicine cures the disease. Some pain is necessary for survival. After he left, Michael from Internal Audit looked at me. The recovery team has filed their report. The resident refused to sign, but the process was fully witnessed. Good, I said. My assistant showed me a message on her phone. Ethan's meeting with audit and legal was confirmed. I instructed her to log all communications. David from legal asked if I needed to add a request to preserve more evidence. Yes, I said, but keep it discreet. I don't want to create a culture of fear at Nexus. I want to create a culture where people know that wrongdoing will be addressed and good work will be protected. That is what governance is. It's not about personal feelings. It's about the rules of the game being fair for everyone. I left the boardroom and walked down the long hall, the sun slanting through the windows. I remembered that morning, standing in the shadows of my own kitchen, being called the help. The same sun, the same heat, but a world of difference. At home, I was a shadow. Here, I was in charge, and I understood that what earns you respect isn't the suit or the title. It's the ability to put things back in their proper order. As the elevator descended, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, likely a neighbor. Amelia, there were a lot of people at your house this afternoon, even the police. Is everything okay? I didn't reply. I didn't need to explain myself to the world. I just needed the evidence and the documents to speak for me. The elevator doors opened to the lobby. I adjusted my bag and stepped out. The city was still hot, but I felt lighter. Not because I had gotten my revenge, but because a wrong had been named and what was right had been put in its place. Some marriages don't die from a lack of money. They die from a lack of respect. And where there is disrespect, wrongdoing will surely follow, committed by someone who believes they have the right. Ethan believed it. Eleanor believed it. But as they say, you reap what you sow. I just wasn't willing to wait for the harvest. I had to clean out the rot myself. I walked out of the building. The sun glared off the pavement. I didn't look back at the Nexus logo. I knew I still had one final act to complete at home, where Ethan and his mother were making their last stand. But it was a futile struggle. When the papers are signed, the access is revoked, and the door is locked with signatures and official stamps. There is nowhere left to run. I returned home as the afternoon was turning to evening. The golden sun still warm on the front steps. But the warmth was nothing compared to the buzz of gossip from the neighbors. Ethan was standing in the yard, his shirt rumpled, holding his phone up like he was live streaming, shouting towards the gate. Look, everyone, my wife is abusing her power. She's brought people to throw her own husband out. A few neighbors watched from a distance. The asset recovery team, the HOA head, and the police officer were already there, standing with David. When they saw me, the HOA head nodded. We're just here to witness, Miss Harris. Keep things orderly. David opened his briefcase. We are here today to finalize the inventory of corporate assets and seal the items belonging to the company. Mr. Carter and his mother have 48 hours to remove their personal belongings. Ethan laughed, a harsh, ugly sound, and pointed his phone at David. You hear that? They're sealing it up. She's trying to take everything. The officer stepped forward. Sir, you need to lower your voice. You have the right to record your objections on the official report. But you will not interfere with this process. The words interfere with this process stopped him. He wanted to scream, but he was afraid of having obstructing added to his list of problems. Eleanor ran out of the house, clutching a bag. Amelia, if you do this, I'll die of shame. I didn't argue with her. I just asked a practical question. Have you started packing your personal items? She was stunned. She was used to tears getting her what she wanted, but tears couldn't turn back the clock on a legal notice. She looked at Ethan for help. He immediately seized on it. She's harassing my mother. Do you see this? She's abusing an elderly woman. I ignored him and signaled to the asset manager to begin reading the inventory. He read each item in a monotone voice. Security system, company property. Key cards, company property. Technical room keys, company property. There was no dramatic raid, just a boring, methodical checklist. Ethan, seeing his drama had no audience, tried to create some. He made a run for the staircase, toward his office. I didn't chase him. I just said to David, please have someone accompany him and document any company materials he attempts to remove. A minute later, they returned. Ethan was clutching a file. David spoke clearly. Mr. Carter is in possession of company documents. We request that he hand them over to be sealed. These are my papers, he yelled. I created them. Your personal papers are yours, I said. Company property is not. You just said you wanted transparency. Let's start now. He was trapped. He looked around and saw the neighbors still watching. He tried to appeal to them. Everyone, be my witness. She's robbing me. A man standing nearby shook his head. The police are right there, man. Nobody's robbing you. Another woman added, they're just doing an inventory. It looks legitimate. The crowd was no longer on his side. David handed him the report. State your objections here. And sign the document transfer. Ethan's jaw was tight. He looked at me, then his tone suddenly shifted. Amelia, just let me keep this for a few days. I need it for something. I shook my head. No. Just one word. No explanation. He knew that no was a locked door. Eleanor rushed to me, grabbing my arm. Amelia, please. I have nowhere to go. I pulled my arm away gently but firmly. Pack your personal things. You can stay with relatives or rent a place. But do not use your tears on me anymore. They don't wash away the things you said this morning. Eleanor stood frozen, her face ashen. Ethan looked from his mother to me, his eyes burning with a rage that was powerless against a signed document. The team finished their work. The HOA head and the officer signed the final report. The sound of the pen was like a final click of a lock. The officer reminded the family they had 48 hours to vacate and that any further disputes should be handled through legal channels. Ethan wanted to scream, but the words were stuck in his throat. I looked at him, not with triumph, but with a sad clarity. You can perform for the neighbors, but you can't perform for an official stamp. The team left. The neighbors dispersed. The yard suddenly felt empty and cold. Ethan stood in the middle of it, with no one left to appeal to. Eleanor walked slowly back into the house, her feet like lead. I followed them inside, checked on my son's belongings, packed my own personal documents, and put everything in a separate room. I didn't want any new accusations of stolen items tomorrow. I stood at the window, looking out at the backyard. The wind rustled the leaves. My mother's words came back to me. In life, winning and losing isn't about who shouts the loudest. It's about whether you're standing on solid ground. And I knew that from this moment on they could hate me, but they could no longer drag me down with their lies. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. Last night, Ethan and his mother had barely slept. I heard them moving about, the scrape of boxes, Eleanor's heavy sighs. I stayed in my room. I made a simple pot of tea and sat alone at the dining table, looking around the living room that had once been their stage. The chandelier still sparkled, the sofa still gleamed, but the air of arrogant authority was gone. Around 8 a.m., I received a text from my assistant. Ethan's meeting with audit and legal was confirmed. I replied with 2 words, *acknowledged*. When it came to the company, I would not be soft. At 9 a.m., Ethan came downstairs. He looked defeated. His eyes were shadowed, his shoulders slumped. He looked at me, his voice hoarse. "You're happy now, aren't you?" I looked at him not as a victor, but as someone watching a person who had chosen the wrong path. "I'm just sad," I said. "Sad that you had every chance to be a good man." He laughed, a twisted sound. "A good man? In this business? Good men finish last." I sipped my tea. Men who climb by cutting corners also fall by them. The fall is just more painful. He was silent. Eleanor came out of her room, holding a small bag. She wasn't crying anymore. The exhaustion on her face was real. She looked at me, her voice barely a whisper. "Amelia, were you really the CEO all along?" I nodded. "Yes." She swallowed hard, still searching for a way to shift the blame. "Why didn't you tell us? If we had known, we would've." She trailed off. I knew what she meant. We would have treated you differently, and that was the most damning admission of all. I looked her in the eye. "Eleanor, if respect only comes when you know my title, then it isn't respect. It's a calculation." Her lips trembled. She turned away, her voice choked. I was a fool. I didn't twist the knife. Not a fool, I said. Just someone who was too comfortable looking down on others. Eleanor walked slowly to the door. On the threshold, she paused, as if wanting to say more, then continued on. She had built her life on words, and now she had none left. Ethan pulled his suitcase behind him, the wheels rattling on the marble floor. He gave me one last look, his voice laced with bitterness. "You won. But don't think life will always be on your side." I stood my ground. I don't expect life to be on my side. I just expect to be on the side of the truth. He said nothing more. He and his mother walked out the front gate. A few neighbors watched, but no one rushed to their side. Yesterday they had seen the paperwork, the witnesses, the official stamps. I closed the gate and went back inside. The house was eerily quiet. I did one last walkthrough. My son's things were packed. My documents were in my bag. The keys were left on the counter, as per the handover protocol. I wouldn't leave a single loose end for them to invent a new story. Before leaving, I stood for a moment in the kitchen, the very place they had tried to confine me. I looked at the empty hook where my apron used to hang and I almost smiled. An apron. They had tried to use it to define me, to diminish me. But in the end, I was the one who got to take it off and walk out the front door, a free woman. I picked up my bag and left without a backward glance, not because I was cold, but because that chapter was closed. The lesson I learned was this: patience is a virtue, but only when the other person is worthy of it. When your patience is used to erase you, standing up for yourself isn't an act of aggression. It's an act of survival.